go over some embossing. These are actually wet embossing techniques, and I had a customer ask me how to do it. She had a couple of the supplies and wasn't quite sure where to start. So this is kind of geared towards her. This is very basic techniques. This is the Embossing Buddy by Stampin' Up. It just kind of removes the static and moisture from the paper before you emboss. It's just a good prep technique. So I'm just going to take this little Embossing Buddy and rub it over my paper that I'm going to be embossing on. And there's kind of a little sandy type residue that's left from that, and then you just blow it away. The ink I'm going to be using is called Versamark Ink. It's a watermark stamp pad. It's a very thick, kind of sticky ink. It allows the embossing powder to stick to the paper. So I'm just going to open this up and ink up my image fairly well on the watermark stamp pad and just stamp it. And you're not going to really see the image. You can kind of turn it in the light and see it, but it's designed to be clear, and it's especially good because when you do clear embossing, you're not going to want it to have color to it. This is the Stampin' Up Embossing Powder Sterling Silver, and so I'm just going to pour this over my stamped image. Just a note, when you're embossing, it can get messy, and it's not easy to clean up once the powder is melted. So you want to make sure that you're working on a covered surface. And this is called a powder pal. It's designed to catch embossing powders and glitters and stuff like that when you're using them. So it's a great tool to have, but you can use a piece of paper to catch the extra and then just dump it back in to your jar, because I can save all this and it can be reused. It doesn't go to waste. So once I get the image stamped, I'm going to remove that little bit of embossing powder. It's going to have this grainy look to it. It's not going to be shiny or anything pretty at all at this point. I'm just going to move it in front of me, and then I'm going to use my heat tool to melt the embossing powder, and you'll see it rise and kind of turn to a really pretty sheen. It'll be hard to see in the video, but if you're doing this on your own, you'll definitely see the difference. I also have my bone folder. I'm just going to use it to hold the corner of my paper down, because these heat guns can get really hot. And also you want to keep it at a safe distance so you're not scorching your paper. So here we go. And there is your embossed image. It's very silvery. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but it didn't start that way. It started as this grainy kind of graphite color. So there is basic embossing. Okay, so now that I did basic embossing with you, I want to show you a really cool technique called Emboss Resist. And if you go on splitcoaststampers.com, you can actually search by this technique and see cards that were made with it. But this is just kind of a cool background technique. Once again, I'm using the Versamark stamp pad, and this is called Glossy White Paper by Stampin' Up. It resembles a lot. There's a glossy, shiny side, and then there's a matte side. We're going to be using the glossy side, and it resembles a lot of a photo paper, but it kind of just lets the ink slide, and that's going to be important in the next step in this. So we're making just a little background here. I just have a little dot, so I'm going to ink it up in the Versamark, and I'm just going to stamp a bunch of these dots all over this paper. You just kind of have to remember where you've gone. You can tilt it and see where you've gone, but I'm just stamping all over because I'm making a background. So now that I have a bunch of these dots all over, I'm going to use Stampin' Up clear embossing powder, and I'm just going to dump it all over where I've stamped. So once again, this powder pal kind of comes in handy because I can just dump away and I don't have to really worry about where I'm getting it. So all that goes in there. I want to make sure that I get all the stamped images covered, and when you're doing it, you will see the embossing powder stick to the images. Make sure they're good and covered. So there we go. We have all of our images covered in the clear embossing powder. And I'm just going to take my heat gun to it now and emboss these. So here we go. Okay, so now I have all my polka dots embossed on here and it's a clear on clear image. It doesn't look like much. But now I'm going to use this spectrum pad, and it has all these different colors in it, and a brayer. I think I want them apart. I haven't done this in a while. I just popped that out. So I'm just going to kind of run my brayer back and forth, get this all inked up across here, and what it's doing, it's getting those several colors of ink onto this brayer. And this is where the glossy paper becomes important on this technique. I'm just going to take my brayer and quickly I'm going to run it back and across this glossy paper. Just making sure it's good and covered. There we go. Cover that back up. And then I'm just going to take a paper towel and kind of wipe off the ink off of these polka dots that I embossed earlier. And that allows the ink just to rub right off of these, and then you have a really cool background paper. This is called Emboss Resist. So these images that are embossed have resisted the ink that you've put over it. So that's just kind of a fun little technique to use also. Okay, so the final thing I want to show you is just embossing with a pigment ink. It's the same as basic embossing, only these are called Craft Stampin' Spots by Stampin' Up. They're a pigment ink. They're a thicker ink just like the Versamark was, but they're colored. So these are available in the full-size stamp pads as well from Stampin' Up. I just have this little Stampin' Spot. This is chocolate chip. This is if you want your image a color that you may not have embossing powder for. So you're just going to ink it up the same way. There's no special, this is not really different. It's just the ink is colored instead of clear. And then you're just going to stamp it on there. So I have my brown polka dot. I'm going to cover it in the clear embossing powder. Dump off the excess. And I'll just heat it up here. And now I have a brown shiny polka dot instead of the clear or silver or gold. This just adds the color through the ink instead of through the embossing powder. So that was done once again with the crystal clear embossing powder and a brown pigment ink to give me that effect. So there you go.